Hey friends, welcome back to my Practically Imperfect Life. So we are getting really close to the end of the first quarter of our current homeschool year, and I have been going through and doing a lot of paper grading lately because my kids are writing assignments for various curriculums of various lengths, and it got me thinking to a topic that I thought many of you might find interesting, and that is evaluating and grading writing assignments, specifically as we kind of move into essays, whether that's a 5-paragraph essay, a specific word count essay, or even a larger research paper, because these are skills that we do start to introduce to our kids, typically in the middle school years, and then definitely as they're going through high school, whether that's papers for their literature course, a specific writing curriculum, maybe they're writing you a research paper or an essay for a history class, or they're doing some sort of deep dive in a science course. I mean, there are lots of different curriculums out there where we might need to include an essay assignment or a book report, something along those lines. Now, I'm sure many of us were not English majors in college. I know I certainly wasn't. I was a science major. And even though I wrote my fair share of papers, like a lot of papers, I didn't necessarily feel qualified to evaluate and grade my kids' writing. I worried so much, like, was I going to take it too easy on them because they're my kids and I want them to do well in their writing? Or am I going to be too harsh in how I evaluate their writing because I'm, pushing them to try to do more and learn more and get better at those skills? Like I worried about it so much. And over time, I definitely have gotten more comfortable with reading and evaluating their writing. So I thought today talk a little bit about some different ways that you can look at and evaluate your kids' writings, how to understand a lot of the different rubrics that are out there for grading writing and how they work and what kind of things they're looking for. And then how is it we kind of figure out if our kids are writing on the level that we feel they should for their age level? How do we kind of evaluate if they're progressing over time? So let's dive in to evaluating your students' writing. One thing I definitely wanted to mention is that there are writing programs out there where you can actually pay a service to evaluate your kids' writing for you, where they submit the assignments electronically, somebody else reads it, edits it, makes notes, sends it back, and whether they're making corrections and sending it in again, or that is simply the grade, that is certainly an option for you. Now, I am very big on keeping things within my budget, and so if there is something that I feel like I can actually do myself, I'm not going to pay a service to do that. But just know that that is an option if that is something that you wish to kind of farm out to somebody else, or if you feel really uncomfortable doing it, you can definitely utilize one of those resources. But for many of us, we're going to simply look at our kids' writing assignments or their essay assignments, and we are going to use some sort of a grading rubric to decide how they did on it, correct? Now, my kids have long used IEW for a lot of their writing curriculum. You guys, if you've watched any of my videos, you know this. And that curriculum specifically does come with what they call a checklist for each assignment. And that was something that was really helpful as they were learning the writing process and just kind of getting those skills built up. The checklist was nice because they could look at it and mark off all of the things that needed to be included in their writing. And then when I was grading, it actually told me how many points to assign for things that they included or forgot to include. And usually it was like new concepts for that week that were scored higher or took up a greater number of the total points because, that was the new thing. We want to make sure they include that, whereas the other stuff is more review. So that was really helpful as they were learning writing skills. And total side note, but I know that there are people who love IEW and there are people who dislike it. Typically the arguments against it are that it's kind of repetition, right? The same kind of things over and over again. But I do want to mention how it has really helped with the other courses my kids are writing for, because with kids, you have to build habits, and repetition is the best way to build habits. So by them being introduced to these concepts over and over again and having to utilize these concepts and these dress ups and these different types of sentence starters like over and over and over again in various writing assignments, it has now become something that is natural for them. So even though they don't have a checklist for their literature courses, for example, when they're writing a paper for that, even though there's not something saying include this type of sentence starter and this type of dress up and these vocabulary words and don't use these overused words kind of things, they are naturally doing those things anyways. They are naturally taking those writing skills and they are working them into their other assignments without any prompting. And that's exactly what I was hoping for by consistently using IEW from their original structure and style course through the theme-based writing programs, is I wanted my kids to feel like writing just came more naturally over time. And that has really helped with that for them. So I do want to say that I felt like that has been really helpful for us in terms of building the writing skills. But that was one type of rubric for evaluating the writing. Now, a lot of times your curriculum, if you have either a writing curriculum or a literature curriculum that has writing components, they will provide you some sort of a rubric for grading. And, for example, here, let me show you up on the screen. This is what I have for my daughter's Excellence in Literature course this year. So she's a junior, and this is their British literature course. And she has to write different types of writing assignments on different weeks. So we do like 4-week modules. She has a shorter assignment on weeks 1 and 2, but weeks 3 and 4 are spent writing typically a 750 to 1,000 word essay on a specific prompt. And then she has a writing assignment for her honors book. Now, when I'm grading those longer essays, this is how they recommend that I grade it. You'll see they have all of these different boxes with different things that they are mentioning. And then I'm supposed to score each one of those categories from 0 to 5. But basically, it has made every single component worth the same maximum number of points. So whether we're talking about content or voice or mechanics and grammar, everything is kind of equal in terms of to the overall paper. And that's how they recommend that I grade that. But there are tons of different rubrics you can use out there. If you go onto Google and you simply type in writing grading rubric, you are going to see just dozens of examples come up. They are going to have things broken down into 3 categories, 5 categories, 10 categories, just kind of all over the place. But how do we understand these and how do we decide what it is we want to do? Well, when you look at a rubric, you can decide how it is you want to break up the number of points. Are there some areas that you want to really focus on giving more credit towards? Is the content of the paper more important to you than whether or not they're using the grammar correctly? Is the smoothness of the writing something that you think is just as important as what it is they're writing about? How is it you want to break it up? So regardless of what is recommended by your curriculum, you can look at how you'd like to grade these papers and determine which pieces of it are more important to you, and you can assign those pieces more points overall. Or you could even change it from paper to paper. If you are focusing heavily on grammar a particular week and you want to make sure that that's what's highly focused on in their paper, make that worth more that week. If they're working on a bigger research paper and you really want to make sure that the content is the thing that they worry about the most, then assign that the most number of points. So you can really flex, ebb and flow with how you choose to assign credit for things. The other thing I think a lot of us might have questions about is what is it these rubrics are actually telling us to look for, especially when we have, some rubrics that have it broken up into 10 pieces and some that have it broken up into 3. Well, when you look at a rubric, keep in mind that typically there's 3 major categories of things that we're looking at. The first one is the overall content of the paper, and that can be subdivided into lots of different categories. But what is meant by content? Well, that is simply what is it they are writing about. And so when we're evaluating a paper and looking at the content, you want to first ask yourself, what was the writing prompt? What was it they were supposed to be answering or writing about? And does their paper answer that prompt or that question or support that argument? Like, did they write something that actually answered the prompt I gave them? And that is kind of the first part. Also, do they have a good solid thesis or a big overarching point for their paper with supporting information? If they are supposed to argue with me, just a fun example here, let's say it's dogs or cats, which are better. Okay, maybe their thesis is, yes, dogs are better, right? Did they include that? And did they provide solid arguments that support that thesis? So that's part of the content. Also going along with that whole idea of supporting arguments, are they including things like quotations or anecdotes, examples that actually support what they're writing about? Are those things appropriate? You might see this a lot if you're writing about, a specific book or a novel study, And, you need to find like a quote from a character or an example from the book that supports what you're writing about. And sometimes students will pick something that actually does fit well with what they're arguing, and sometimes the quote just won't seem like it goes along with it right. So looking at, did they choose appropriate things to include for their argument? The other part that kind of goes under that overarching category of content is, how is it all organized? Is there a noticeable introductory paragraph, that highlights what it is they're writing about, explains their thesis, briefly introduces their arguments? Is there a solid conclusion, something that pulls it all together and wraps things up nicely? Are there body paragraphs that each have a main idea with supporting sentences? So how is it that everything is organized? Is there a good flow between everything, or is it just a bunch of random stuff all thrown together? The second big overarching category would be style. And again, this is a category that could be broken down into more parts, or you could look at it as a whole. And this really has to do with just, how does this essay read? If I sat there and I read it out loud, would it flow nicely, or is it all broken up and choppy? Did they include different types of sentences, or is every single sentence a short one? I like dogs. We should get a dog. Dogs are great. Or did they combine things together and expand upon ideas and use different types of sentences? Do we have complex and simple ones kind of mixed together in a way that makes sense? A great way to look at style is to actually read the essay out loud and just kind of listen to how it flows. That'll give you a great idea on how they did with style overall. You can also make sure that they are using the correct point of view. Are they writing in the first person if that's how it's assigned, or are they writing in the third person if that's how the paper should be written? How is it that they are making the topic engaging? There are papers that you read and they are so boring. I mean, you can usually tell if your student has felt engaged with the subject. Like if they enjoyed it, it will come across in their writing, and you can tell when they're just like, I can't believe that my mom is making me write this paper and this is the most boring topic ever. But did they try to make the writing engaging? Did they try to show or try to include things that would, pull the reader in and keep the reader interested? So that's really kind of the things that would go into style. And then the third overarching category are the mechanics. So this is when you get into kind of the nitty-gritty of grammar. Are things spelled correctly? Are we using proper punctuation and capitalization? If you have the type of paper where you need to be citing sources, are sources cited correctly within the paper? If you have a quote from a book, are you making sure that you're noting, the author and the page number? Do you have a works cited page? If you're assigning papers to be written in, for example, MLA format for like a literature paper, or APA format for something that's more science related, are they using those requirements properly? So this is, again, just kind of more of the grammar check for everything overall. So regardless of which type of rubric you use, whether you download one off of Google or you use the one that's included with your curriculum, you are often going to see those three main categories repeated over and over again: the content, the style, and the mechanics. Now, sometimes they're termed a little bit differently, or again, you might see ones where they've kind of taken that main concept and they've broken it down into multiple different sub-concepts, and you can do whichever way you choose to. I a lot of times will use the rubrics that are included in the curriculum that I have, at least to be able to break things down into categories, but I won't always assign credit the way they recommend. So as I mentioned with our Excellence in Literature, it tells me to give content the same amount of weight as I would grammar. Now, do I want to make sure that the grammar in the paper is correct? Yes, but I feel like when we're putting that much time into a paper, I care more that she has got those key ideas and concepts in there than I do if she forgot a comma. It's more important to me that she is really expressing the idea well, because it's easy to teach her to fix a grammar error. It's much harder to get her to understand how to get a key idea across. And so if she's doing that well, that's what I want to give more weight to. And that's just my personal preference on how I like to assign credit with my papers. Now, the depth with which I've evaluated papers has definitely changed over the years. When we were in the middle school years, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I was really focusing on just introducing essay writing. I wanted them to get comfortable with writing a few paragraphs, and then like that basic 5-paragraph essay. I think about 7th grade, I started assigning those 5-paragraph essays whenever we did a novel study. Getting that idea of having, an introductory and conclusion paragraph and those 3 body paragraphs that all kind of answered a question or, talked about one main idea. And when I was looking at those back then, I really did try to simplify how I was evaluating. I had those 3 categories in mind, right? I had the content, I had the style, and I had the grammar. But I was heavily focusing again on content. And I wasn't, going through and really like checking off a whole bunch of extra boxes. It was more like, did they get the main idea across? Does it flow relatively well? I mean, I understood that they were in middle school and they were still getting the feel for, their voice as writers. And then were they doing the basics with regards to grammar? At that point, we weren't doing, a whole bunch with like strict MLA formatting or anything like that. It was just, are you making sure that you are using your capitalization and punctuation correctly and spelling things right? And are you doing a works cited page? And then we've introduced more of MLA format as they've moved into high school. So that was really kind of what I was looking at when we were evaluating writing assignments in middle school. And then as they've progressed through high school, I've added kind of more details to my own little check boxes. I'm looking for more things in each of their writing assignments and critiquing it a little bit. I don't want to say more harshly, but critiquing it more than I definitely would have back in the middle school years, because my expectation is that as they're learning more in their writing courses and as they're learning more in their literature courses, they should be including more things in their writing. And so that's just kind of how I've looked at it over time. Now, how is it that I actually go about grading a writing assignment? Now, I'm not going to sit here and like pull a paper up and show you details, but I will give you kind of an idea of what it is that I do each time I have a writing assignment to grade. The first thing I do is read it through front to back, like read through the whole thing, start to end. And a lot of times that initial read through, I will read it out loud. Reading it out loud to me is one of the best ways for me to just get an idea for the flow of the whole essay. So I'll sit down here in my little basement room and just kind of read out loud to myself. The things I'm looking for on the initial read through are, is the essay answering the question that I gave them or the prompt I gave them? Or does it feel like it's really off topic? Do I notice an introductory and conclusion paragraph? And does each body paragraph seem to have one main idea? So that's what I'm looking for. Have they answered the question? Do we have a beginning and an end? And is there one main idea to each paragraph? Those are the key things I'm looking for on the first read through. Now, usually what I will do is with like a highlighter or a pen is I will look at each paragraph and I will try to identify what was their topic sentence, because that lets me see kind of, does each topic sentence go with the overall theme of the paragraph or the theme of the essay? Or do we have a body paragraph that's like way off in, Never Never Land that has nothing to do with the rest of the paper? Then I can look at each paragraph a little more closely and see, does each subsequent sentence of that paragraph fit within that topic? So that kind of gives me an idea on the content side of things, right? And it also gives me an idea a bit on the style. How did everything flow? Is everything organized well? Does everything make sense together? Then on the second read through, I'm going through with my little red pen and I'm going to be looking more for grammatical errors. So are there spots where there's run-on sentences or an incorrect use of, prepositions or adverbs? Are we missing periods or capitalizations? Did we not cite something well? And that's usually the 2 times through I will go through a paper. So first time through, I will read through, often out loud, checking for content and then whether they answered it. Body and conclusion, or intro and conclusion. Does each body paragraph have a topic, and do the sentences in that paragraph fit with that topic? Does everything kind of all flow together and sound good? Now, a lot of times my kids will have turned in papers to me initially, and I'll have done a little editing before I hand it back. And that's usually a good time for me also to just make some recommendations. I do not give my kids specific verbiage to use in their essays. I don't say, I feel like you should write this sentence like this. I will mark a spot and say, hey, read this out loud to yourself and ask yourself if this sounds like it flows well. Because a lot of times that points out to them somewhere where maybe their sentence structure could be done a little different, or the way they're proposing their argument can be a little different. And I found that has helped them when they're editing to get ready to turn it back in to me for a final grade. So one concern that a lot of homeschooling parents have that we know we shouldn't have, but we do, right? If we admit it, we do, is that we worry that our student isn't at the level they should be for their grade. But we have to remember we homeschool, right? We're homeschoolers, which means that grade level doesn't really matter, right? If your student is reading on a 5th grade level when they're in 2nd grade, that's fantastic. But if they're reading at a 5th grade level and they're in 7th grade, that's okay too. It just means that they're taking a little longer to get up to that higher level of reading. And that, as homeschoolers, is a chance for us to be able to customize things and focus in on things different and really change up how we're teaching and working with our kids to help them succeed. So don't worry so much about whether or not your 9th grader is writing at the same level that other 9th graders in public school are. Because I guarantee even within the public school, there are 9th graders who could write a novel today, and there are 9th graders who could barely put words together in a complete sentence. There is a huge range in writing abilities in kids in public school, private school, and in homeschool. So don't stress so much about whether or not your kids are where we perceive they should be at their grade level. Rather, look at them in terms of how are they progressing over time within your homeschool. If you started homeschooling right from the beginning, you should have seen over time your students' writing develop. You saw them go from doing a few words in a simple sentence to a more complex sentence, to a paragraph, to a couple of paragraphs, to a 5-paragraph essay, to a research paper. You've seen them progress over time. And hopefully over that time period, you've seen improvement in the quality of their writing, the inclusion of new vocabulary, utilizing new grammar skills, and using them correctly. And if you started homeschooling late, maybe you pulled out your student in middle school, or maybe you pulled them out in high school, you could assign a quick writing assignment to them just to get an idea of where they're at right now. And I think that's a great starting point. Have them do, just a quick 5-paragraph essay about any topic. Maybe what's your favorite holiday? Make it something simple, right? Have them write out a quick 5-paragraph essay so you can see where they're at with their writing skills now. And that'll give you an idea on things you might want to focus on over the course of that school year or several school years. Maybe their grammar is terrible, and it's all of that texting, right? With all the shorthand and things like that. But maybe their grammar is terrible and okay, we really need to focus on improving our grammar over the course of this year. Maybe it's not being able to identify topic sentences. Maybe they write a paragraph and it includes way too many different ideas and they're not cohesive. And so that year we need to focus on a quality paragraph and writing a quality paragraph before we even worry about moving into essays. There's lots of different things that you could choose to focus on, but understanding kind of where your student is at will give you an idea on things you might want to address over the course of the year. But no matter when you started, whether you started homeschooling in elementary school or middle school or high school, really it's looking at that progression over time. Are we seeing a gradual improvement in the flow of the writing, the vocabulary being used, the type of grammar skills and concepts being included, and the organization of their overall papers? You'll also notice too, as you move through the different years of curriculum, that writing prompts will change. My daughter's writing prompt in her first year of excellence in literature, while they were very thought-provoking writing prompts, I definitely have seen how much more she has to kind of deep dive into topics and really think about things for her third year of Excellence in Literature, this British literature course. There's a lot tougher reading assignments, and so along with that come tougher writing prompts as well. In fact, let me grab her book here. I'll give you an example of a couple of the writing prompts that she is seeing this year for her papers. So here's the writing prompt for the upcoming module that she's getting ready to do. She's going to be reading Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So she has two options for prompts. The first one says, consider the ideal of knighthood as presented in Sir Gawain, the Red Cross Knight, and an author. In what ways do each of these men embody the ideal knight, and in what ways does he fail to live up to that ideal? Does it seem that Spencer and the author of Sir Gawain support or critique the traditional chivalry ideal? Use quotes from the text to support your thesis. So you can see that that particular prompt, she's going to have to be looking at several different stories. She's going to have to be pulling things that support arguments for why each of these different individuals either fit an ideal or don't. And she's going to have to kind of analyze the writings overall to figure out what is it that she thinks the author thinks of all this. So there's kind of a lot involved to that. It's not as simple as, early book reports that she may have had in middle school. The other prompt that she could choose says, analyze the figurative language used in book 1. It lists certain stanzas. Pay particular attention to the ways in which figurative language indicates that all is not as it seems, especially in connection with the setting. Look at how the Red Cross Knight has a difficult time distinguishing appearance from reality. So these are just prompts that are going to make her think a little harder, have to, prepare for her writing a little bit more in depth, pulling resources, pulling quotes, and writing out and organizing her ideas before she puts it into an essay format. So this is just one of the ways that I can see her writing progress over time. Because again, the writing prompts she had back in middle school and even like in 9th grade when she had her first year of Excellence in Literature were quite a bit simpler. And so my evaluation of the writing was also simpler. I was looking for, simpler answers to simpler prompts. I was looking for basic writing skills, whereas now I'm expecting her to pull in a lot of the things that I've known that she's learned over the years. Kind of going along with that idea of just looking for a progression in your students' abilities is also looking for the things that they're learning in their various curriculums being incorporated. If your student is working on certain types of vocabulary words, whether that's in as part of their literature course or if they're doing a separate vocabulary book, are they including those in their writing? Are you seeing the new vocab they're learning flow into their writing, or are they using the same old words over and over and over again? If they're learning new grammar concepts, are they starting to include those in their writing, or are they sticking to just, the basics over and over again? If they have been learning about different types of literary themes or literary concepts, are we bringing those into our writing, or again, are we just stagnant in our abilities? So it helps to kind of know what your students are seeing in those different aspects of kind of their English literature courses, and kind of watching for those to flow into their writing. And if you notice that they've gotten stagnant in their writing, it doesn't feel like they're getting any better at it, maybe it's time to just kind of go back and review some particular concepts again. And the next time you assign a paper, make sure that they know that you expect them to focus on pulling in some of those things into their writing. Maybe that means making them a checklist or showing them the rubric that you're going to use to grade. So when they are looking at their paper before they give it to you to grade, they can sit there and say, okay, did I make sure that I did all of these different things? Kind of goes back to how we did the IEW writing, correct? Where my kids had the checklist, they made sure they had everything included before they gave it to me. It's the same thing with writing rubrics. In fact, when it comes to the Excellence in Literature course, the rubric that I use for grading is in the back of her student textbook, so she can see right away how it is that each of her essays are going to be graded. Overall, as homeschooling parents, we should never feel that we aren't qualified to evaluate our students' writing. Just bear in mind that most grading rubrics, whether they're provided by your curriculum or something that you get online, are going to be dividing up the grade into 3 parts. They're going to look at the content, the style, and the mechanics. And whether you look at each of those three parts equally or you give one more weight than the other is totally up to you and what you feel is the most important thing to focus on with your students. As you kids progress from like middle school to high school years, are we going to be looking for more things to be included in the writing? Well, absolutely, because we are looking for that progression over time, that growth in our skills. And that's really what we should, focus on looking for. It's not comparing your student to another person's child. I don't look at my friends' homeschool students and say, is my daughter and my son writing at the same level as they are? And I'm not comparing them to how kids are doing in public school or private school. I'm looking at each of my kids individually and how is it that their individual writing is progressing over time. And from that, I can figure out how I can best support them as they go through their homeschooling years. So as we wrap up the video for today, let me know down in the comments if you have any great writing resources you would like to share. Maybe it's a particular website that you or your students have found helpful. Perhaps it's a curriculum or an activity program, something that you have felt has helped build their writing skills or helped you as the homeschool parent be able to evaluate and teach their writing. I'll get you started. I will share the Purdue OWL with you. This is one of my favorite resources. In fact, I used its resource all the way back in college and it's still around today. It is a fantastic way to learn how to write MLA papers, how to correctly cite sources, include quotes, how to do the proper works cited pages. It is just absolutely wonderful. My daughter has been utilizing it a lot this year for writing her papers for Excellence in Literature, and it is 100% free. So I will link that down below in the description box for you if you'd like to check out that resource. But go ahead and share your ideas and your resources so that way all of us can check those out and see if they will work in our homeschools as well. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up before you go, guys. And as always, happy homeschooling.